Have you ever really stopped to think about what happens inside the mind of a dictator? They always seem to start off with this incredible confidence, right? An iron grip, totally in control, convinced of their own genius. But then, almost like clockwork, something starts to shift.
And that shift, well, it's not random. It's this fascinating and pretty terrifying psychological breakdown. That rock-solid confidence starts to crack, and this deep, gnawing paranoia just takes over. What began as control sours into pure suspicion.
And I'm not just talking about a little general distrust. No, this is extreme life-and-death paranoia. I mean, you have Stalin, who had his most experienced military generals executed. Saddam Hussein, in this just unbelievable act of suspicion, had his own son-in-law killed. And then there's Kim Jong-il, who reportedly had food tasters for every single thing he ate because he was so terrified of being poisoned. So what's going on here? Are these just the stories of a few unhinged individuals? Or is there a predictable pattern, a kind of psychological blueprint that explains how this happens again and again? Well, it turns out there is. And once you see it, you realize this isn't just about dictators. It's really a study in how trust can completely fall apart in any organization.
Okay, so where does a pattern like this even begin? Well, it starts with a kind of surprising idea. Power doesn't always create the paranoid mind. A lot of the time, the system is designed to select for it right from the very beginning.
Psychologists actually have a name for the personality traits that thrive in these environments. They call it the dark triad. And study after study shows that these three traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, which is basically a willingness to be cunning and manipulative, and psychopathy, are way, way more common in people who go after and achieve extreme power.
Now, you'd think these traits would be a huge disadvantage, right? But if you're trying to claw your way to the top of a ruthless system, they're actually, well, they're like superpowers. Narcissism lets you see people not as humans, but as tools to get what you want. Machiavellianism gives you the cold-blooded willingness to betray an ally to get ahead. And psychopathy makes you comfortable with huge risks that would have most of us breaking out in a cold sweat.
So here's the key takeaway for this first part. The whole brutal game of authoritarian politics works like a filter. It weeds people out and selects for those who are already suspicious, already transactional. Then, power comes along and just pours gasoline on that tiny pre-existing spark of paranoia.
So what happens when they finally make it to the top? This is where the second piece of the puzzle falls into place. See, even if a leader started out perfectly sane, the environment of absolute power itself starts to warp their view of reality. It's what you could call the information bubble.
It's like a trap, and it all starts with fear. Your advisors are terrified of you. So what do? They stop bringing you bad news. Your generals only tell you about the victories, never the defeats. Pretty soon, you're living in a total fantasy, a reality constructed by everyone around you just so they can survive another day. But here's the kicker. Deep down, you know you're being lied to. You just don't know who's lying or about what. So what's the only logical move? Suspect everybody. Trust absolutely no one.
And this is the part people often get wrong. It's so easy for us to just write these leaders off as being irrationally paranoid. But from their point of view, the threats feel very, very real. And why wouldn't they? They know exactly how they got to the top, by backstabbing and outmaneuvering their rivals. So naturally, they assume everyone around them is playing the exact same game.
I mean, just look at Stalin's infamous purge of his own military leaders back in 1937. For decades, everyone just assumed it was pure, baseless paranoia. But guess what? Recently declassified documents show that some of his generals were actually in contact with Germany. His suspicion wasn't pulled from thin air. It was based on a real pattern, even if his reaction was completely catastrophic. His brain was just stuck on high alert, constantly scanning for the next threat.
And that brings us to the final and most destructive piece of the pattern, the spiral. This is the point where everything we've talked about, the suspicious personality, the information bubble, the constant threat detection, all comes together and starts feeding on itself, leading to a total break from reality.
The secret ingredient here, the thing that makes it all go haywire, is loneliness. As a dictator gets more powerful, real human connection just vanishes. You can't trust your friends, your advisors are just telling you what you want to hear, even your own family could be a potential rival. You completely lose the ability to get a simple reality check, that thing we all need when a friend pulls us aside and says, "Hey, you're overthinking this."
Without anyone to push back, the mind just turns on itself. Psychologists have a word for this, rumination. Think about a worry you've had. Now imagine that instead of talking it out with someone, it just loops in your head, over and over, getting bigger and more distorted each time.
For a leader who's already on high alert, this isn't just a worry. It's a threat analysis running in an echo chamber, where every dark suspicion is confirmed by the silence.
And this is where the whole thing becomes a dark, twisted irony. The paranoia eventually creates the very thing it was afraid of all along. The leader's own paranoid actions end up creating the very enemies they were looking for.
Stalin is the perfect and most tragic example of this. In 1937, he gets rid of his best military commanders because he's suspicious. Just 4 years later, Germany invades, and the Soviet army is a chaotic, crippled mess. His paranoia directly manufactured a real-world disaster that brought his entire country to the brink of collapse. The prophecy came true because he made it true.
So there you have it. The blueprint is pretty clear. First, the system selects for a suspicious mind. Then, power traps that mind inside an information bubble. The brain gets stuck in constant threat detection mode, which, with no one to offer a reality check, spirals into a self-fulfilling prophecy. And finally, the leader's sense of reality just detaches. Power doesn't just corrupt, it can psychologically dismantle the person who wields it.
Okay, but beyond being a dark history lesson, why does any of this actually matter to us today? Well, because these same psychological forces, these same patterns of eroding trust, they're not just in palaces. They are at play everywhere, in our offices, in our communities, in all sorts of organizations. I mean, just think about it for a second. A dictator purging disloyal generals, is that so different from a CEO who fires anyone who dares to disagree with them? Total information isolation. Sounds a lot like a corporate culture full of yes men and departments that don't talk to each other. And being hyper-vigilant about a coup, well, that mirrors the toxic paranoia a manager might feel about their own colleagues. It's the same pattern, just playing out on a different stage.
And that's the real takeaway here. You don't need absolute power to fall into these traps. The erosion of trust, the danger of being stuck in an information bubble, the endless spiral of your own worries, these are human vulnerabilities. And understanding the psychology of how power warps the mind gives us a framework to spot these destructive patterns wherever they pop up, long before things go completely off the rails.
So I want to leave you with this question. In your own world, maybe at your job, in a community you're a part of, or even just in the news, where do you see this pattern playing out? Because once you can spot the echoes of the dictator's disease, that's the first real step to breaking the cycle.